Welcome back, everyone, to the Deep Dive. Today, we're going to jump into something really fascinating, uh, cultural fusion, and how it shaped regional identity in southern India way back between 300 and 1200 CE.
That's a pretty big chunk of time.
It is, and we have these really cool sources to help us piece things together, right? We've got these excerpts about the Madhyamaka school of Buddhist philosophy.
Ah, Madhyamaka. Always a good time.
Right. And we're going to be looking at Catherine Asher's work on Mughal architecture.
Now that's a fascinating contrast. Buddhist philosophy and Mughal architecture.
I know, right? It seems like, what could they possibly have to do with each other? But, that's kind of the challenge and the fun of it.
Right, exactly.
So get ready, because we're going to see how these seemingly different ideas and architectural styles can actually tell us a lot about how cultures were blending and interacting in southern India.
I'm excited to see where this goes. It's always amazing to me how local traditions manage to combine with these broader influences, even stuff coming from outside India, and create something totally unique.
Yeah, totally. And to really get this, we've got to start with, what is cultural syncretism anyway?
Right, back to basics.
It's basically how different cultures, they mix, they merge, and then boom, something new is born.
Imagine combining, I don't know, jazz and classical music.
Yeah, exactly. Or Indian spices with Italian cooking.
Fusion cuisine. You get the idea, right? It's not just borrowing, it's taking those different elements, adapting them, and making them your own.
Exactly. And a really cool example of this is in the Madhyamaka school of Buddhist philosophy.
Okay, hit me with it.
So we were reading this scholar, David Seifert Ruegg, right? And he points out that the Madhyamaka, they were all about moving beyond strict categories. Things aren't just existence or non-existence. They're not just permanent or impermanent. It's more fluid, more interconnected.
Okay, I see where you're going with this. So this idea of rejecting fixed categories, that kind of mirrors how cultures were mixing and mingling in southern India.
Exactly. Think about it. You've got all these different groups and ideas bouncing around. It wasn't like one culture just took over everything. It was this constant back and forth, this blending that made southern India so unique.
It makes you wonder, right? How did this way of thinking actually play out in everyday life? I mean, did it affect their art, their music?
Right. Unfortunately, our sources don't really dive into those specifics.
Ah, the limitations of historical research.
Always. But, even if we don't have all the details, we can still kind of look at the bigger picture, see those broader trends.
Okay, I'm game. What kind of trends are we talking about?
Well, let's fast forward a bit. Let's skip ahead a few centuries to the Mughal period.
Mughal period. Now we're talking grand architecture, right?
Exactly. And even though the Mughals came later, their architectural style gives us a glimpse into how cultural exchange was shaping, artistic expression.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Lay it on me.
So the Mughals, they were known for these amazing buildings, these palaces and tombs and mosques.
Oh yeah, the Taj Mahal, for instance.
Exactly. And Catherine Asher, in her work, she talks about how a lot of this style was influenced by Timurid architecture, which came from Samarkand in Central Asia.
Samarkand. That's pretty far from India.
It is. But see, that's the thing, right? These influences were coming from all over. And one example she gives is Humayun's tomb in Delhi.
Another stunning piece of architecture.
Right. It was designed by an architect from Bukhara, which was steeped in those Timurid traditions.
So even at this early stage, the Mughals were bringing in influences from way outside India.
Totally. But they didn't just copy-paste, They took those influences, those ideas, and they adapted them, blended them with their own style.
So what kind of stuff did they mix in?
We'll take the Nine-Bay plan, for example.
Nine-Bay plan.
Yeah, it's this layout where you divide a building into 9 squares or rectangles. So it's a big thing in Timurid structures. But the Mughals, they took that plan and combined it with things that were already common in Indian architecture.
Okay, so it's like they were taking this foreign concept but Indianizing it, making it their own.
Exactly. And another really cool example is the charbagh gardens.
Oh yeah, those beautiful gardens with the waterways.
Right. Divided into 4 quadrants. And those, they were inspired by Timurid traditions. But for the Mughals, they had this deeper meaning, right? They symbolized paradise, connected to their ideas about nature and spirituality.
So it's more than just pretty landscaping. It's a reflection of their beliefs.
Exactly. It's like even something as simple as a garden design can have all this cultural significance woven into it. So we see this Timurid and Indian blend in those big grand structures like Humayun's tomb. But was this fusion going on even in their earlier buildings? From the very beginning?
That's a good question. I'm curious about that myself.
Well, Asher points to Babur's mosque at Panipat, built way back in 1527.
Okay, so very early Mughal period.
Yep. And even there, you see this fusion of Islamic and indigenous elements.
Wow, so they were really open to incorporating local stuff right from the get-go.
It seems like it. It wasn't about wiping out what was already there, but about blending, creating something new. And as their empire grew, their architectural style kept evolving too, right?
Absolutely. I mean, you see this amazing blend of Timurid concepts and like this refined Indian aesthetic in Akbar's palace at Fatehpur Sikri.
It's like they were constantly experimenting, pushing the boundaries of their own style.
And always open to new influences. Which, it makes you wonder, right? If this exchange was happening in architecture, what about other areas of culture? Like, what was going on with music and religious practices in southern India during that same time period?
That's a great question. Unfortunately, the sources we have don't give us a ton of specifics on that.
Darn. That would have been really cool to see. But I guess that's where a bit of educated guesswork comes in.
Right, like we can still use the info we have to make some educated guesses about what might have been happening.
Exactly. So let's dive into that. I'm ready to speculate.
All right, let's do it.
It's like we can use what we know about other parts of India to fill in some of the blank.
Right, like connect the dots. We talked about how temple architecture in Bengal was, like, going through these changes, right? So do you think there's any connection to what might have been happening in the South?
Oh, totally. I mean, think about it. Around that same time, you have those incredible temple complexes at Khajuraho.
Khajuraho, those are amazing.
Right, with those intricate carvings and those, like, towering structures.
That's like, whoa.
And those temples, they show this, like, beautiful blend of architectural styles with influences from North and South India. So it wouldn't be surprising at all if there was similar stuff happening in the South.
So it's not just like North versus South. There's this exchange, this back and forth going on.
Exactly. And this blending of styles, it wasn't just limited to architecture. It probably went into religious practices, too. Like, think about the Bhakti movement.
Oh, yeah, Bhakti.
That was really picking up steam around this time, especially in the South.
Right. It was all about, like, that personal connection with the divine.
Exactly. Expressing your devotion through poetry, music, rituals. And what's interesting is that Bhakti kind of, like, cut across those traditional social hierarchies.
So it wasn't just for the elite or anything?
Nope. It was for everyone, a movement that brought people together from all walks of life.
So Bhakti could have been like this unifying force, bringing people together through a shared devotion.
Absolutely. And I bet that fervor manifested in all sorts of ways, from huge Tamil festivals to smaller, more intimate gatherings.
Imagine, like, the streets are alive with music, processions, all these rituals, and it's all about connecting with the divine.
It must have been incredible to witness. And, within all that, I bet there were tons of local folk traditions mixed in with those more, like, formal Hindu rituals. That fusion, it's at the heart of what cultural syncretism is all about.
It's like you're weaving together these different threads, right? And each one adds to the richness, the complexity of the whole thing.
Beautifully put. And just like we saw with architecture and religion, music must have played a huge role in this cultural fusion, too.
Oh, yeah, totally. Even though, we don't have a playlist from back then.
Right. Sadly, no Spotify in 800 CE. But it's easy to imagine the sounds of drums, flutes, stringed instruments, filling the air during those festivals and ceremonies.
And like we saw with architecture, there were probably influences from all over India mixed in with those, like, indigenous Dravidian styles.
Exactly. I mean, think about Carnatic music.
Oh, yeah, the classical music of South India.
That tradition has roots that go way back to that period, and I bet it still carries echoes of that old musical blending.
So it's like we can still hear whispers of the past in the music of today. That's so cool.
It really shows you the lasting power of cultural exchange. It's not a one-time thing, it's this ongoing dialogue, this conversation between different traditions that keeps shaping and reshaping how people see themselves, their identity.
It's like instead of thinking about cultures as these, like, separate, isolated things.
Right, like boxes.
Yeah. It's more accurate to see them as, like, constantly evolving, always influencing each other.
Absolutely. And it makes you realize that cultural syncretism isn't about one culture dominating another. It's about this, like, creative fusion, a blend that creates something totally new and exciting.
It's like in a forest, right? It's not less beautiful because there are different types of trees.
Wow.
It's the variety that makes it so vibrant.
That's such a great way to put it. And in southern India, we see that different cultures weren't just existing side by side. They were actively mixing and matching, sharing ideas, beliefs, art, you name it.
It's like They weren't afraid of those outside influences. They saw them as opportunities to grow, to innovate.
Exactly. It's like adding new spices to a recipe, you know? It shakes things up, creates new flavors.
And it makes you think about how interconnected the world is today,
Yeah.
even more so than back then.
Absolutely. And understanding this whole idea of cultural syncretism, it's so important now because it helps us appreciate the diversity of human experience, right?
Yeah.
And see the connections that like bridge those differences.
It's also a reminder that our own cultural identities aren't set in stone, right? They're always being shaped and reshaped by all these forces, both from within and outside.
That's so true. And that actually brings us to a question I want to leave with our listeners today. It's a really cool thought, right? Like, we're all products of this incredible mix of influences.
And it makes you realize how much richer our lives are because of it.
So we've been talking about how cultural exchange shaped southern India centuries ago, right? But now I want to flip the script a bit.
Ooh, I like where this is going.
I want you to think about your own life, your own community, your own background. What examples of syncretism can you find?
Yeah, like right here, right now, what are those hidden connections?
Exactly. Take a look around. Think about the music you listen to, the food you eat. Can you trace those threads, those different cultural influences that have come together to create your world?
It's like a treasure hunt, right? Looking for those cultural gems hidden in plain sight.
Exactly. And I think you'll be amazed by what you discover. It's a great way to understand not just history, but ourselves.
Absolutely. So until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep diving deep.